This afternoon, we're going to have two panels, the first of which is going to discuss the news in the Los Angeles market, and the second of which is going to ask the question, what can be done, and in fact, is there anything that should be done about this? For the second panel, we'll have three major participants moderated by Warren Olney of Which Way LA, KCRW, whom all of you probably know, and they'll be here shortly. But to lead off the first panel, I'm delighted to introduce Terry Anzer, who is a member of our faculty here at USC in the Annenberg School as an assistant professor of journalism, and who has just won a Golden Mike for her role as the co-anchor of the Channel 5 News at 10. Terry Anzer.
Well, I want to welcome everyone to this town hall meeting, and that's exactly what I'd like it to be, a real town hall meeting and an exchange of ideas where people will be speaking freely and saying some of the things that really need to be said about the quality of our local news here in Los Angeles and how Angelenos feel about that. Now, one of the biggest challenges in assessing the quality of local news in LA is the sheer quantity of news in LA. We have 7 English language stations and 2 Spanish language stations. In the morning hours alone, they account for 11 hours of programming, 8 in the late afternoon, 10 hours in the evening. Add it up and you'd need more than 24 hours in a day to watch one day's output of local news in Los Angeles. And usually the people who criticize it the most watch it the least. So, where to begin? Today is the last day of the all-important February sweeps period. LA news stations get their overnight ratings throughout the year, so they're always very ratings conscious. But the sweeps months of February, May, and November are more important because that's when they determine the advertising rates. That's also when you tend to see more stories about topless parties, cyber sex scandals, dirty restaurant raids, you name it, anything to hold the audience. Now, as we also saw during this sweeps period, LA television can also rise to the occasion of a breaking story with powerful El Nino storms and other problems taking their toll on the Southland. So we asked USC graduate student Tammy Katzoff to prepare a sampling of the February sweeps to get our discussion going. And we knew she was just the right woman for the job. She holds a bachelor's degree from Queens College in New York City, and she has already worked on The Charles Grodin Show, Inside Edition, TV Nation, Law & Order, and Time Out New York magazine. She's also one of the senior producers on the School of Journalism's weekly TV news magazine program, Impact. And this year she will earn her master's degree in broadcast journalism from the Annenberg School for Communication. We're very proud of her. Here's Tammy Katzoff.
Thanks, Terry. My mission was to find the good, the bad, and the ugly of local news in Los Angeles. And to do this, I watched 20 hours of local news, which aired in a 2-week period during February sweeps. And what you're about to see is a sampling of what I saw during those 20 hours of television. But I guess the challenge is to strive for the exceptionally well done story that can really make a difference.
Thank you, Tammy. A lot of times news directors ask me, where are the bright young producers coming from? And they're people like Tammy Katzoff. So thank you very much for putting that together. Anybody who sits down and watches 20 hours of local news all at once deserves a medal for something. I don't know what, but something. Right now, I'd like to introduce the members of our panel, and Tammy, I'd like you to take a seat and join us as well. We're very happy to have with us today Carol Black, NBC Channel 4 President and General Manager. She holds the distinction of being the first woman to head a commercial television station in Los Angeles. She's responsible for the day-to-day management of NBC4, overseeing news, programming, sales, marketing, promotion, strategic planning, and operations. And prior to joining NBC4, she was with the Walt Disney Company as Senior Vice President, Marketing Television. Welcome, Carol. We've come to know our next guest as a really wonderful contributor to our weekly brown bag lunches here at the School of Journalism and Communication, where we get together once a week and discuss what's happening in the news. Karen Baudre is a first-year doctoral student in communication here. She did her undergraduate work at Princeton, graduating in 1988 with a bachelor's degree from Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public Policy and International Affairs. She earned a master's in public administration from Villanova in 1990, a master's in communication from Cornell in 1997, and she even worked for Bell Atlantic's Executive Development Program, a very busy lady. Karen, welcome to the panel. Bill Boyarsky has been with the Los Angeles Times since 1970, currently as city editor, previously as a columnist, Los Angeles City Council, that's not right, City County Bureau Chief, General Assignment Reporter, National Political Writer, you name it. He worked for the Associated Press and the Oakland Tribune. He won the Pulitzer Prize for local reporting of spot news team coverage, presented to the staff of the Times for coverage of the first day of the 1994 Los Angeles earthquake. Welcome, Bill. Stephen Cohen is news director of KCOP-TV in Los Angeles, a position he also held at stations in New York, Boston, and Detroit. He was president of WGRZ-TV in Buffalo and has served as executive producer of Courtroom Television Network and as vice president and general manager of CBS television stations. He was my colleague for many years at CBS, but now he's my competitor at KCOP, and a very worthy one. He's a multiple Emmy winner, and he's won a DuPont and numerous other awards. Welcome to Stephen Cohen. Stephen Malave is executive producer of KMEX TV's Noticias 34. Malave oversees the editorial content of the station's local news, coordinates the daily newsroom operations for KMEX, and it is the flagship station of Univision Television Group. Welcome, Steve. Here's the classic case of someone who needs no introduction, but I will anyway. Jess Marlowe is the host of NBC4's highly acclaimed weekly informational series, Channel 4 News Conference. The half-hour program explores a wide range of issues, and Marlowe, of course, is well known as one of Southern California's most respected broadcasters. He retired from his Channel 4 weekday anchor duties in April of 1997, and we are very privileged to have him with us here today. Judy Muller's doing double duty. She filled in for someone earlier this morning, and now she joins us again. She's ABC News correspondent based in Los Angeles, reporting for World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, Nightline, This Week with Sam and Cokie, and the other ABC News broadcasts. Prior to joining ABC News in 1990, she spent 9 years as a correspondent for CBS and contributed to CBS Sunday Mornings, CBS Weekend News as well, and she was part of the Nightline team that received a DuPont Columbia Award and an Emmy Award for coverage of the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Welcome again, Judy. Constance Rice currently works as the Western Regional Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. She has litigated cases involving police misconduct, housing discrimination, employment discrimination, education, and voting rights, and she no doubt will have much to contribute to our panel today. Thank you for coming. Howard Rosenberg is TV critic for the Los Angeles Times, and he's been doing that for 20 years. His column reaches hundreds of papers on the LA Times, Washington Post, Wire. He's a part-time lecturer in journalism here at USC's Annenberg School for Communication, and also an adjunct professor at both USC and Cal State Northridge in critical studies. He won a 1985 Pulitzer Prize for criticism. Welcome, Howard. I'd like to get to the audience as soon as possible, but I have an issue and a question to get the ball rolling. Just so you don't think we're only beating up on local news in Los Angeles, here's a news item from Denver. A media watchdog group is asking the Federal Communications Commission to force 4 TV stations in the Denver market to curb sex and violence in their news as a condition of license renewal. Since the FCC no longer requires TV stations to meet any criteria in how to handle the news, such as fairness and equal time, the group is attacking the stations as threats to public safety. They also criticized the stations for not covering important local issues, including elections, the environment, education, arts, poverty, children, and AIDS. I'd like to go first to Constance Rice and ask, has it gotten so bad in Los Angeles that we should be asking for the licenses of the local stations to be revoked?
Oh, let's not be provocative. You know, 4 years ago, I would have said, let's contemplate going after their licenses. No, but I have noticed recently, but seriously, it's a complex issue because we covered this morning a lot of the issues about the nature of the business, how difficult it is to be able to cover issues of substance because you're focused on business values, which are getting ratings, making money. And the business side of it isn't about covering issues or keeping a democracy glued together or any of the other things that a lot of us would hope that journalism would help to do. So when you put it in that context, I think if you take crime and the violence and the titillation, who was it this morning who said it was tits, vets, pets, and something else?
Tits, tots, pets, and vets.
Tits, tots, pets. That was a wonderful one-liner from this morning. But getting out of that and looking at what the damage, the impact, the consequences of having journalism trivialized, which was one of the things that we talked about this morning in the ratings that we saw, some of the shows, and it is a mishmash. However, I would like to pose the following impact. In a city like Los Angeles, where we are physically segregated, culturally segregated, we are emotionally, there's very little glue amongst us, and you have crime reports, and this was 4 years ago, I noticed a saturation of crime reports, where you had underclass, very poor African-American and Latino male faces in the gang. Remember, every story was gangs, shootings, drive-bys. It wasn't that if you were reporting on that, it was the context that was left out. And what I noticed was, when I went to my colleagues who live in Bel Air and Beverly Hills and very rich communities, there were gates and barbed wire and private police. And I said, who are you afraid of? They were afraid of the people that they saw on television. And these are the people who are the safest people in the world, mind you, except maybe in Bogota, where they've got armed guards and bulletproof limos. But because they had this enormous hysterical sense of danger from watching news and from having it portrayed with no context. There was never any context showing that there were 60% unemployment rates for these kids. Why do they go into gangs? What's the underground economy? How many people know that in South Central is that 80% of the economy left, and that 80% of the economy is underground? It's drugs, it's car theft, and it's guns. And so there was no context as to what created this culture. And the people who were the safest people in the city were arming and had this political view of the people who were saying mass imprisonment and what Phil Donahue this morning called the hidden issues and the screaming subtext of what we ought to be covering. So I would say that the complexities of the issues in the medium don't allow you to get at this stuff, and it harms our ability as a democratic culture in LA to actually achieve what we need to achieve politically, culturally, and in every other way.
Well, let me bring in one more panelist who actually is part of a show that's trying to address some of these very questions. Val Zavala is Vice President of News and Public Affairs at KCET-TV. She oversees the nightly broadcast Life and Times Tonight. It offers an alternative news format and content to Southern California viewers. And Life and Times Tonight is now one of a handful of public television nightly broadcasts nationwide, and she comes to us with 8 years of commercial television experience. Val, I'm so sorry. I filled all the chairs and I just completely messed up there. But we're so happy that you could be with us. No problem, no problem. Anyway, Connie's raising the point of all the things that are not covered. My question to Steve Cohen is, can you get a number if you cover that stuff?
Yeah, I think you can. And I think, although I might seem to be the contrarian on this issue, I don't think that numbers, ratings, are derived from the things that our critics think they are. That list, that little litany of cutesy things that you just said, make up ratings, I don't think do. And I don't think they do anymore because we're a mature industry. We're just like, in some ways, like hamburgers or beer, you know. The ingredients aren't what gets you known. It's the packaging and the marketing of the ingredients. Pretty much newscasts in Los Angeles are the same. They are in Denver, too. I think that the way you can differentiate yourself is to do the stories you're talking about. Last night we did a story on the 30th anniversary of the Kerner Report. There's a new report that came out on the Kerner Report. And what did that tell us about society? Unfortunately, things you just outlined are still true. We're still a separate nation in our cities, and we certainly cover the cities somewhat separately. But I think you can make a difference by covering politics and government, education, health care, an enormous issue that everybody cares about. You'll do as good on television in the second segment if you do a story on an HMO that destroyed a family's life because they wouldn't treat a woman who had a heart valve problem, as you will if you do a story on vaginal laser reconstruction, which is also a story that and that's happening now.
Oh, come on. Look at that story that was up there from Channel 11. All those,
Well,
I think it was a story about a sex party or something, right, Tammy?
But Terry, look, what's the matter with that? You know, I mean, what's the matter with multiplicity of voices? You know, if the Fox folks feel that in one broadcast they want to have a story, my favorite story that they did in a sweep was biker babes, you know, Harley ladies, scantily clad in leather goods on bicycles. That's a neat story, but you know, they ran it at 10:45, and in the first 40 minutes they did news as good as anybody. So it doesn't seem to me, what I worry about these Rocky Mountain characters is that they're saying, well, this is what the news should be. You know, it should be this. It smacks of an elitism of a kind that I can't deal with, whether it's imposed by government, pressure groups, or anybody else. News guys should be able to do what they want, news guys and gals. Put it on the air and let the public decide.
Carol Black is nodding her head to all this.
Well, to a lot of it, I agree with what Steve's saying. I do think that you can get a number, if that's, since we're talking about ratings here, a number with an HMO story. With that, I mean, there are some features that I wanted to do. I don't come from a journalism background. I came to a station with no station experience whatsoever, but experience in television. And I think my expertise, I guess what they were looking for is I think I have an understanding of the viewer. I come from the viewer perspective. And when I came to our television station, but I feel like it's been about 3.5 years ago, but I felt it was true for a lot of LA television that our news was, it was if it bleeds, it leads. And it was very violent news. I had stopped watching the news because at 11:30 at night, I was like, if I watched the news, I felt upset. And I wanted to get a good night's sleep. So when I came, this was after the riots and, after the earthquake and a lot of things that happened that had divided Southern California. And I felt that people are no different that live in Southern California than live anywhere in the country. They want a sense of community. They want a sense of doing things. And they also, want to hear good things too. And there needs to be a balance. And we do report murders when they happen. We do report crime that happens. We absolutely do. And we all do. But I think we started to go softer, if you will, and that was the term used, and we started doing some stories like Beating the Odds about, extraordinary young people under the most difficult circumstances who overcame very difficult odds and wanted to go to college. And our viewers responded to that. And we do the feature every week, and we have the Crystal Apple Award for the best teachers, and we have unsung heroes that we feature every week. And they're kind of like in the newscast, and at first it was really hard to get the news people to want to do this. They were worried about ratings. Long term, I think it has helped build us to the point at which I'm happy to say, because of the group there, because it does matter, it's a business, that we are in the #1 position, the leadership position, and we weren't before. I agree with what you're saying. We can't do just commodity news, what everyone else is doing. And I do think that, but we also have to realize that I think news is also about what people not only need to hear, but what they want to hear and what's interesting to them. And so it's not going to be, I agree with what Steve's saying, it can't be just what we dictate in a given room. It's like saying you should all listen to opera. Trust me on this. Opera is what you should be listening to. And you shouldn't listen to anything else, because opera is a better form of music. And, I'm sorry, but everybody isn't going to do that.
But then should we all listen to the lowest common denominator?
No, that would be, in my mind right now, that'd be Jerry Springer, but, I'm not going to argue with people that want to watch that because there's a lot of choices. Would I prefer, did I have a chance to have it on my station? Yes. Do I want to have it? No. But do I like the numbers he's getting? Sure. But
Well,
everybody
Val's
makes choices.
station seems to feel there's a need for an alternative. Why?
I think probably every single person on this panel in this room would agree that there is a need for an alternative in the sense that you're talking about choice. That's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about giving people a choice. I mean, last night, I think when most people were, or a couple nights ago when Pamela and Tommy Lee's divorce was all the rage, we were doing a story about Iraqis who had fought on our side against Hussein and were now imprisoned by the INS here.
Did you do anything on Pamela and Tommy Lee?
We didn't. No, we didn't, of course. No, but you know why? Because the truth is that if you're interested in Tommy and Pamela Lee, and plenty of people are, you can get it. And the same thing, we've done, while other, I guess Robert Downey is high on the list right now for coverage, and last night we did, or this night when he was hot, we were doing a story on the sale of the Queen of Angels because it is one of many, many nonprofit hospitals that are being sold to commercial ventures, and the safety net for the poor is getting thinner and thinner. So we do offer an alternative. And believe me, I was in commercial news, so I'm not going to get up on the holier-than-thou road and say that I haven't covered some of the less than noble kinds of stories. I mean, I've been out in front of people's homes when their 3-year-old has been shot accidentally by the 6-year-old, and I've had to stick around to get the body, and the parents have been angry at me, and if I had a rent to pay, I'd probably do that job again. So it's not a matter of moral superiority or nobility, but it is a matter of choice. I think, however, is what's happening in the marketplace is that we are getting, just like magazines, you either buy the tabloids at the supermarket shelf or you subscribe to U.S. News and World Report, or I guess there's even some that are smarter than that, up in the Reader and Republic. And in the same way, I think broadcasts are becoming stratified in a sense. I think what the problem comes in a sense if you don't know what you are. Are you for this group or this group or this group? And so you get all mixed up. And I think that's why, if you're talking about ratings, to go back to the number, and then I'll shut up. You can start saying we can get a number here and we can get a number here, but remember the overall trend is down. I was reading the article about the Orlando station, which is an interesting article in the New York Times Magazine if you haven't seen it, about a station that tried to take the high road and is having trouble. At any rate, this is probably typical of all U.S. markets. 20 years ago, at 11 p.m., 92% of the people had their television sets on. 20 years later, in 1997, 57% of the people had the television on. So you can be trying to get a number, but you're talking about scrambling for smaller and smaller, crumbs.
Plus, in Los Angeles, more and more of those sets are listening in Spanish. Steve, do you find that your station is providing a real alternative, or you're just doing the same thing everybody else is doing in a different language?
No, we're not. We're not doing basically news translated into Spanish. What we are, besides trying to find the local Latino hook for any story, we go beyond that. Trying to find an angle that relates to our viewers. But you won't find the Tommy Lee and Pamela Lee story on our station. The issues that we deal with on a regular, consistent basis, immigration, education, our broadcasts are catered to our audience, specifically their needs. The number one issue in this area with Latinos is immigration. And not only that, but then education, as far as with the Prop 209 and 187 before that. It's just we don't go towards that. We don't have them. We don't have, our time is precious, basically. Our broadcast time is precious. We don't have time for the Tommy Lee story. We don't have time for if Madonna and I had a baby. We're not going to send a live truck out there. It's just, our viewers really don't care about that.
Howard Rosenberg, help me out here. I know it's natural for everybody to promote their own product and how wonderful it is, but we got to be doing something wrong.
Yeah, I was just thinking, local news is obviously doing so well, there's no need for us to stay around, we can all go home, And unlike Connie, I know no one who lives in Bel Air or Beverly Hills, and I'm scared to death of my next door neighbor, so I have a different perspective on that. And before we go further, I just want to note something that was striking to me, that this is the day that Fred Friendly died. Fred Friendly, who was a former president of CBS News, spent much of his career urging television newscasters to do a better job. Should die in the same week that KCBS is doing a series on talking to the dead. And I just thought that was a lot of... in their kitchens. That's amazing. I guess it's up to me to be the dissonant here. I think local news in Los Angeles is narrow, it's superficial, it's too thin. I think it's not serving the public. I think it's getting worse. I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's getting worse for a lot of reasons. I'd be interested to know, number one, Val, why you would do that job anyway if you needed the money. That to me speaks to the lack of ethics in this business. And number two, I'd like to ask Steve, he tipped off a lot of topics. Would you be willing to assign somebody those topics as a beat exclusively to cover those stories?
Sure, if I had the bodies. I have 6 reporters.
So what good is it to send in generalists to cover intricate stories?
Because you're being too narrow in your thinking.
I'm being too narrow?
Yeah, you are. You can send somebody in to do an education story, and they can be read in on the story and come up with a good piece.
Do you think parachuting? Let me just finish you talking. Do you think parachuting somebody into a story is as effective as having somebody cover that as a beat? Whether it's local government, whether it's the environment, whether it's race relations,
no, I don't.
whether it's why doesn't a station in Los Angeles have a bureau in Sacramento, the state capital? Okay, the state capital.
I'd like to interrupt that. As far as Univision does, in fact, I most recently came from the newly purchased Univision station in Sacramento, and when I was there, I opened up the Sacramento bureau for Univision.
Why no one else? Okay.
Okay, well, we do get stuff out of, you get material out of Sacramento, you put material on, you decide to do a story, and you do it.
But it's not the same thing.
It's not the what?
You get material out of Tibet, too. It's not the same thing.
That's true.
Are you saying it's not?
It's gotten so bad that not only do most stations not have reporters in Sacramento, they don't have regular beat reporters at City Hall. Bill Byarski, how is the viewer less well served because of that?
Well, television used to cover the city council a lot. I always thought because it was, after they pulled out of Sacramento, they started covering the city council a lot, and I thought it was because it was there. I mean, it's an easy trip. You can stop off there for a few minutes on your way. I would like to say something in defense of celebrity journalism. As a person whose career peaked during the O.J. Simpson trial, I feel that, and someone now who's responsible for our local news report at the Los Angeles Times, or at least I have been for the past 2 days, that the celebrity culture is part of the Los Angeles story, and I mean I don't mean mindless kind of coverage, and I don't mean gang-banging celebrities while they're on their way to taking their kids to preschool just after they emerged from a heart operation. But certainly the Robert Downey story, which we put on page 1 this morning, was not only a celebrity story, but it was a story of celebrity justice. The Spielberg story, which we're following, is in the view of a lot of people, a view of celebrity justice. And I think through celebrities you can tell a story. So if you read our paper this morning, you'd see on page 1, you'd see Robert Downey, a drug offender, escorted with a sheriff's patrol to wherever he was going that day. And on page B1, you'd see the story of a incredibly impoverished immigrant family where the father of was accused of killing a 5-year-old child, one of many children, and that whole story kind of opened the world a little bit into a whole segment of Los Angeles that nobody ever notices. And so we use Downey because everyone's going to read a story about Downey because he's a celebrity. But if you read that story, you also see that there's really unfair justice here in Los Angeles County.
Judy Mueller, is it any different when you cover LA for a network?
Well, of course.
We're
Oh, come on,
competing.
those people in New York think of us all as a bunch of fruits and nuts out here, and they want those celebrity stories, right?
Yes. And by being here today, I apparently have evaded the Robert Downey assignment. But covering Los Angeles from a network point of view is obviously different. We're competing to get on the air with people from around the world every day. So it's got to be a big story, or it's got to be a little story. Big or little. It's got to be celebrity-oriented that matters, we would like to think. Also, anytime anybody in Malibu falls into the ocean or gets burned up, that makes people on the East Coast somehow feel superior and justify living there. And we can always get on with a crazy, kooky person, because that justifies their feelings about Californians in general. And I am ashamed to say I have fed into those stereotypes just to get more airtime now and then. But I am, from the network point of view, sometimes depressed on how hard it is to get follow-up stories. For instance, we had riots here 7 years ago, I think it was, 7 years ago, that tore this city apart, tore the country apart in ways, and you'd be hard-pressed to sell any kind of story that takes a look at what's happening now in those areas. Are those conditions still ripe for discontent? Of course they are. But nobody wants to hear about it until it happens. Immigration, now that the courts have ruled that immigrant mothers can't get prenatal care for future citizens of the United States, I've talked to a number of doctors and nurses who have told me they're going to defy that order and refuse to bar those people from their clinic doors. I think that's a story. I don't know why local news isn't doing it. It's always hard to be a national network correspondent and criticize local news, but I would probably come into Howard's
Local
camp on
news
this.
does do that. But local news
well, wait a
does do
minute.
these stories.
Well, they do some of them.
They do.
But when you have, like, during the sweeps week, and you didn't have this one in your clip, you know, are your bras dangerous to your health? You know, and true, I only saw the promo. I didn't tune in to hear the story.
No. I know who did it.
Killer bras, and I was waiting all week long to see if my bra would kill me. That's got to be 2 or 3 minutes that could have gone to a story like that, and I just don't believe that you are serving. I've lived here 7 years, and I have yet to learn much about my city council, except that, you know, when the leaf blower dispute comes up, or I know Nate Holden was, you know, accused of groping some woman, and I know that Hernandez was accused of drugs, sort of like the way we cover the White House, actually.
I do need to, I need to say one thing about city council, just so everyone understands. I would have thought, because I live in LA, that that's what people wanted to hear too. But what we hear, and I think other television, this is the great part that newspapers can do in different areas. We're broadcasters. We cover 4,000 square miles, and so many different city councils are involved. And when we do a story, which we do more of than anything else on LA City Council, our phones are flooded with, what about us? We don't care about LA. I'm in Orange County, I'm in Riverside, I'm in Ventura, and you never serve us. And so after a while, we have a harder time. We do cover the stories, and we probably covered more but we don't cover enough local politics. You're right.
It's just a matter, it's a matter of will and a matter of talent and a matter of style. I mean, you can cover anything there is. You can cover something that everybody thinks is boring. And if you're skillful, you can make it interesting. And I've known a lot of broadcasters in my career who had that ability, and most of them are now no longer employed or covering politics, which isn't covered anymore. But it's really a matter of talent. I mean, I cover boring stuff all the time. I mean, I'm bored by a lot of when I was a columnist or when I was a reporter, I was bored with a lot of the stuff that I covered, or I thought it was boring, and when other people wrote about it, so I knew it was boring, but I knew it was important. I mean, you have an obligation to make important things, to get them on the air, and you have a real obligation of making boring interesting. And anyone who's really skillful has the ability to make boring interesting. And if you can't make boring interesting, it's because you don't have the skill, you don't have the talent.
Or the news director doesn't want to give you the time.
Or the news director is an idiot. Or the news director's an idiot. And they could get rid of the news director because they fire news directors every 6 months. There's a new news director.
True. Well, sometimes that's true. You know, in print you have the same problem, I think. I wanted to make just two comments based on this article that was raised by KCET. This was the New York Times premise. Some of you have probably read it, and Michael Winterup wrote it. His premise was, does local TV news have to be so bad? You know, I contend that's the wrong premise. In the piece, he talks about the 3 Orlando stations, and one guy who's, as we like to say, is taking the high road. High road means politics and government, news defined in a narrow way, generally a way that news elites think news should be done, usually folks that wind up in universities and sitting in audiences and panels like this, and not what, you know, the general public, what they used to call, the British used to call the great unwashed. You know, the great unwashed are people that I represent. That's what you get paid for if you're in television news anyway, you know, is to represent regular folks and their concerns. And in this piece, Winterup refers to, he actually goes to the Museum of Television and Radio in New York. He has to go back into the chronologues of television history to find a newscast that he thought was a good one. Okay? And he says, I go to New York and I look at local TV news from 20 years ago, and I was shocked to be reminded how much things have changed. In that era, there were fewer pieces. They were longer. There was less crime news, and local news was really local. Well, I know a bit about that broadcast because I was a news director in 1980 in New York. And things have changed, and Bill's right, and Rosenberg's right, and you're all right. I mean, and what's changed is that the macro dynamic of television news is totally different today than it was in 1980. Why? CNN was still the chicken noodle network in 1980. Most of us wouldn't go work for it. There were no news magazines in prime time. There were no news magazines, period. Documentaries were on the way out. You could collect talent in one place that was so stunning by today's measures, you couldn't believe it. In my newsroom alone at Channel 2, I had John Stossel, Arnie Diaz, John Test, Jerry Nachman, later executive editor of the New York Post. You had a gathering of eagles, not only at my station, but everywhere.
Well, you probably wish you had Jess Marlowe.
I was blessed to work with Jess coming to Channel 2 in LA. And the other thing that we had, which was on the macro level so critical, was that the guys that were running the business, okay, didn't see these television stations as just another fungible commodity. They believed in service. They believed in the FCC mission. They understood that we existed with a purpose, which was not only to be profitable and to get ratings, but to serve. And that's the environment that's changed.
I would like to get Jess Marlowe's perspective on this, Steve.
You have guys today that own 55
he looks like he's chomping at the bit to get in. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jess. Do it. Save me. Help.
Entertainment is news. Now, I was listening here. Don Oliver said, if you really want, just say, in my day we did this. See, now that I'm retiring, I can say, in my day we did. But at one time we did have beat reporters, Howard, at specific beats. I remember the guy that was assigned the agriculture beat would go into the Central Valley, did a stand-up, Jim Bennett, you'll remember it, Don.
Time at the First World War.
Did a stand-up in front of a field talking about the plight of those who are picking spinach. And he was standing in a field of broccoli. David Horowitz was assigned to do education. We had a City Hall reporter. But one of the things we didn't have was the god-awful competition we now have. People didn't have remote controls. People really weren't dictating what we covered. We dictated what was covered, and we did it with what we thought were very strong journalistic principles. And I think they were much stronger than they are today because, and I've always blamed the market researchers. I'm now, after listening to this morning's session, willing to blame the market. When Jerry Springer beats Nightline, beats almost everything else at 11 o'clock except Carol Black's 11 o'clock news.
But why should we be blaming the viewers and blaming the market
'Cause they're
researchers
the one who
and
determine what they
blaming the
watch.
competition? I mean, why can't we just do the right thing?
Oh,
That's a
absolutely
good
we could.
question.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely
I don't
we could.
understand why
I don't know how long we'd
each station
survive.
can't take a reporter and assign, I mean, a good reporter, gutsy, good writer, somebody who can put things in an interesting way that would get people's attention, sign them to City Hall, let them split their time between City Hall and Sacramento. I cannot believe that local stations do not have Sacramento bureaus. I am astonished. This is one of the biggest states. It's like its own country in terms of its...
Carol and I have talked about it.
It's got to be interesting. Willie Brown was there, for God's sakes, and I couldn't get enough of him, but I never got any of him. I mean, I was fascinated with this void because I started my journalistic career in New Jersey, where covering the legislature is really fun because so many people are crooked.
Yeah.
They are now, we just don't know about it.
Right. Well, that's the problem. What don't we know? I mean, the only thing that I see on local news that feels like a communal experience is high-speed chases, which I admit I love. And we'll stop and watch.
Thank you for your honesty, Judy. What I'd like to do, because this is a town hall meeting, is call on my esteemed co-host, Jess Marlowe, to do his best impression of Phil Donahue without the skirt, and go among you looking for good questions to contribute to the discussion. I would like to make a couple of requests while the technical people set up for the inclusion of the audience component. Please ask a question. Please don't make a long speech. And what I'd like the panelists to do is once again continue to feel free to engage each other and the questioner, and let's have a real dialogue and see if we can break some new ground here as opposed to just stating what all of us already know.
Let me start by asking the question, because that's the premise I think what we're working on here is what do people in Los Angeles do to change what they don't like about local television news? And the question, of course, is what especially do you not like about local television news? Would you like to take a crack at that? I want to ask, unlike Donald, you don't have to state your name, but you may.
One of the things that consistently bothers me when I watch local news is that the amount of time spent on the weather and sports. All I want to know is it going to rain? Is it going to shine? What do I need to wear to go out in the weather? But that usually ends up about a minute or two of sports reporting, weather reporting. And then sports reporting goes on and on. But then all the statistics I study say that arts are higher attended than sports. And so I wonder, why isn't there any arts on local news?
Who'd like to take a crack at that?
I'd like you to tune in to Noticias 34, 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock. Our weather, we don't have a weather talent. We don't have a weatherman. We're the only, well, the Telemundo station as well. Right down to it. Current temps, forecast for tomorrow, and if you're traveling, here's what you face if you're going to San Jose or if you're going to Tegucigalpa.
That's right. And if you speak English, watch Life and Times. We do weather in a 15-second bumper, and every Thursday we have Edward Goldman on for his regular arts and culture editing.
And you thought all the promos were on the air.
But you know, but the truth, you do have to search.
I'll say something about weather because I'm as surprised as any. As I say, I didn't come out of journalism. I've been shocked by in Southern California. Forget El Nino, but just under normal circumstances, I couldn't understand why anyone needed to know more than look out the window. You know, I mean, that's pretty much, it's the same every day. It's the #1 reason why people tune into news. And they want to know that. They want to know the 5-day forecast. They want to know if there's, I mean, I'm surprised myself. I think,
Tell you about your journalists.
yeah.
That's why you have to choose.
Karen?
You have to find the broadcast that fits your needs.
And then also, too, I don't understand, since we're on the complaint of news, you know, you have Los Angeles, which is one of the, you know, most diverse cities in the world, and the coverage of, you know, of different ethnicities in the local news, from what I've observed, is really very, very poor. And I don't understand how that's not done. I mean, the different panelists have been talking about things that can and should be done, and why something like that isn't addressed in this city. It kind of leaves me baffled.
Give me an example of the kind of story you'd like to see and don't see.
Someone brought up today earlier just how I mean, maybe everybody does know this, but how there are 10 Armenian newspapers in this area, so meaning that the Armenian population here in Los Angeles is the largest outside of Armenia. You know, there are many populations that are like that, that I think you could find some, not even find a story, there probably is a story to be told about that, you know, really isn't brought out.
Would you all watch that?
I'd like to say one other thing. Not only is it that the different communities in this tapestry that we've got here in the county, not only is that not there's no translation, not just linguistically, but in terms of there are entire worlds in LA that have not been introduced to one another because the television coverage isn't used for that. And then it's also the way and the perspective from which these stories are reported. You can get a lot of ethnicities covered. I don't know that we need African Americans covered anymore, but I don't think I want it done from the O.J. Simpson trial any further. And it's through that prism that you end up covering and introducing communities to one another, and that's where I think a lot of the damage is done. It's very narrow, it's very biased, it's sensational, and it's the content and the perspective and the coverage. And just to get back to it, I saw that almost every local station had enough money to fly people to camp out in the White House for 3 weeks, but they don't have enough resources to go to Sacramento. I'll tell you, there was a period in time when there was absolutely crucial damage control up in Sacramento. There was a huge battle over how these block grants were going to be shaped to salvage what was left of our welfare system in California. So it's the new welfare to work system. And it was a crucial battle between the Democratic controlled committee and what the Republican governor was, what Wilson was trying to propose. There wasn't a single report, and I have to admit I didn't see every news. I didn't do the 20 hours that you did. But there wasn't a single report, but there was for 3 nights running a story about a snake that ate a chihuahua. I just decided at that point I better go back to my cases.
You know, Channel 28 has a guy, you may not like his style, but what he does is terrific, and that's Hugh Hauser. He merely walks into neighborhoods and talks to people. And consequently, you see people that you never see on television anywhere else in L.A. And I think it's just incredibly interesting. And if it were done in the right way on a commercial station,
Actually, you're right. I agree with you about him, and it's
then let me
a good
change my
idea if
position.
nobody else jumps.
No.
No, he's
What you
great.
don't need is
No, you're right. You're right, he is. He's
I have
great.
a lady in the balcony.
I want to sort of go with something that Connie and Judy have brought up in terms of the political responsibility of covering politics, which all sounds so boring. I mean, the political decisions that the decision makers are making in Sacramento and in City Hall affect the lives of all of your viewers. And if you can bring alive the fact that these decisions on immigration, healthcare, and education are impacting their everyday lives, that would be the biggest service you could ever do, but also the most interesting thing that they probably would learn to want to watch, because that is the thing that I think is most disturbing and most depressing about local news in LA, is not knowing what's going on. And if you know what's going on, meaning what's going on to us as a community, and not just what's going on to somebody's pet or some dog that bit a kid's face.
Well, let me ask you the same question that...
Can I say something about, I'm sorry, I had to say this, and I didn't want to be here defending news necessarily. I thought I was going to be defending against car chases, but which I don't quite get either. But
Judy likes
but I'm sorry, on education and healthcare, then you're not watching our station, because one of the ways we've grown, and I see in the research and I see it in the viewer comment, is we do cover education, we do cover healthcare, and we do because those are 2 things that viewers are more interested in. Everybody's like we are. We care about that. They care about their family. They care what happens. And even if they don't have kids, they care about education. And we happen to have a reporter that reports on education. She does general assignment, but she reports on education. And whether it gets a bump or not, we report on education, but it has to come from the point of view of how it affects the viewer, because they care very much. So let me just finish. If she's not standing up there in Sacramento, it doesn't mean that we don't have the story. You know, it is an electronic age. We have to be fairly realistic about this. There's no story we can't get.
So my question...
Pardon me?
Unless we happen to be covering it.
Well, there's it. And what I learned about that was, and there have been the times, as you know, that we didn't cover the car chase.
So
and we did have the
I'm very
viewer.
interested, because you said that you were covering education, so I didn't see your newscast last night, but I'd be interested. So did you cover the biggest single bond issue that's ever been passed in California was passed yesterday in the state Senate, and it goes on to the Assembly and the voters? Was that in your newscast?
You know what? I can't tell you right now because I didn't. No, I can't because I was at something last night. I couldn't swear.
But wait a minute. Let's take the issue of education.
But you make a good point. If we didn't, then
let's take the issue of education.
I'm willing to take the beat me up for all of LA. That's
There are
fine.
a number of stations that have covered education just in this year because the politicians decided that it was the issue. But look at how it's covered. How many of you have seen some context? How many of you saw a discussion about class size? Remember, class size was the quick fix of the day. And everybody reported, the papers reported on this, and everybody reported on it. And I saw nothing that set this quick fix, and it's an important issue, but when is it important? When does it solve a problem? What extent of the huge problems does it solve? I saw none of that. The other quick fixes, these agendas, when I saw Gray Davis's thing, I was no wonder no one reported on it. It made no sense in terms of what we know about what actually changes poor kids' systemic problems in schools.
Well, what we've worked with is Marion Wright Edelman is connected with our station with the Children's Defense Fund. We have selected to work through this and work through stories about young people and the difficulties that they're having and the things they don't get from schools, and the family support that isn't there, and the money they don't get because they're on welfare. And we've selected to do it through individuals, and I think everyone can select to do it in their own manner. But getting a story told through an individual has been very effective for us personally. Everyone can choose, I think, how they do it, but getting the story out
it tells the voter nothing about whether Dianne Feinstein's initiative is the fix. What would it take to fix our schools? What could be a more important issue? Nothing. This county isn't going to make it, folks.
You're assuming that political leaders have answers. And I don't think,
No, I'm not assuming political leaders have answers.
I don't think they always do.
I'm assuming that there's information out there that can put a context on what the proposals are and that can educate the voters.
We agree.
That's what I'm assuming.
We definitely agree on that. I think our challenge is to take the time to attack those issues and tell them in a way that is intellectually honest to people at home. And just doing it from the perspective of the knuckleheads in Sacramento, City Council, and the Board of Supervisors in this town doesn't get you there. Because those folks don't tell you much, they don't have much to offer, and what they do have to offer is mostly process that never comes out in results.
Maybe you used the snake and the chihuahua as kind of a metaphor.
Well, they make snake and the chihuahuas is 40 seconds of a television.
No, it was 3 nights, and they spent 4 minutes on it.
So what?
You're a veteran journalist. You know the value of sources and hanging out with sources and getting to know sources and understanding the beat, not just parachuting in, doing a story and getting. I mean, you know that.
Sure, but you have to pick your spots. That's all I'm saying. You have to look. I'll give you an example from my own shop. Okay, simple example. Okay, everybody else is saying on the Lewinsky story, what happened to the president? I said, who are Kenny Starr's pit bull dogs? Okay, well, we found one. His name's Michael Emmett. He happens to be a guy that came out of L.A. Okay, so we went after the story. Just 2 guys on my staff. I said, let's find everything out we can about Emmett. So we did the record search, and we found, lo and behold, that he's considered a callous prosecutor, that he tried to set up a woman in a major case against sheriff's deputies, that he dated opposing counsel while he was in the midst of a major case, jeopardizing, millions of dollars that the county put into the case. We broke the story. You can do that. You just have to take your shots. Now, we did that story. We got, thank God for Jonathan Alder. He saw it and he wrote about it in this week's Newsweek. We puff our chests out about that. That says to me, and it's not just us. I mean, everybody in this town has stories like that. On O.J. alone, Channel 4 broke more of the O.J. story than Dominic Dunn would ever break on the story. And it wasn't because they were specialists, they had some. It was because they just took the time to say, if we focus our journalistic resources on this, we can come up with a great story. We did on Emmett, they did on O.J. And across the board in LA journalism, not at every station, I'll agree not at every, but at some stations you will find the kind of journalism, albeit narrow, in my view, but it's there on television. It's just that you don't see it every day. You don't get it. And the result is that because of the macro change of the way people view us, as Jess was saying, you can't get the impact that you used to have 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if I did the Emick story, we would have been the biggest thing on the planet in terms of breaking that story. Today, it's lost. And you have to struggle to get a Jonathan Alder, yourself, or Bill, or someone else to take the story up and give it something more.
Let's get another question from the audience.
The other night, after Jay Leno went to his first commercial break after his stand-up, I noticed that I had learned more through his 5 or 10-minute comedy routine than I had learned on watching the local news that night. He talked about Monica Lewinsky, he talked about El Nino, and he talked about Saddam Hussein. I actually learned things from this tape delay at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, whenever it was done, than I had just learned from watching the 11 o'clock local news. So it made me think, is it that news is just entertaining and funny for guys like Leno and Letterman and everybody else, or is it that the substance is just being covered and it's really like you can turn on, get these big stories, the big headlines, and that's pretty much it? You can really save yourself a lot of time by just flipping on one of these comedians at 11:30 and learning everything from them.
Flipping on the comedians, flipping off the news.
I'll give you a five.
Excuse me.
You could have Fritz
In
do
New York
that.
City, I saw this in the New York Times today, the first time since they've been doing ratings in New York City, at 11 p.m., the rating winner last week was for the first time not a local newscast. It was the reruns of Seinfeld. So I don't know what that says, but I think that the audience, I don't know. If you're going to try to compete with entertainment, you're going to lose. So why not inform people about what they need to know about how to live their lives and being part of their neighborhood? I just don't buy this, we don't have the time and the resources, when, in fact, as somebody said, you're sending people to Nagano, you're sending people to the White House, when there are networks that can do that for you, and usually a lot of us are affiliated. Instead, the whole idea is to drive up the Q rating, thank you, for your local anchors and reporters. That's all that is. Because you
meanwhile, the network is doing health features and fitness features and
news you can use.
Yeah, you bet. Good question.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Mr. Rosenberg and Ms. Mueller said earlier. I want to address the issue of celebrity in the news. I'm from a small town in Maine, and we don't have that. And I understand that celebrities are a local issue because they live here. But I'm wondering if we took those 15 minutes of local newscasts that are about the celebrities, about Christian Slater in a posh jail cell, and use that more towards education or more community-oriented issues, if that might solve some of the problems, or if the celebrity issues are necessary to have on local news, if that is really what's making your ratings.
Well, I think you point out one thing that's important. It probably is too much, not only on us, but on national news, too. But it is the entertainment capital of the world, and if we were in Detroit and there were car stories, I can guarantee that we wouldn't say we have too many cars. I mean, I just say it's a unique marketplace for that. Every major entertainment company is here. And I don't want to defend how many times anybody does it, and it makes national. I'm always surprised that it makes international news. I don't get that sometimes.
Can we keep it just on the national level, since entertainment is such a national issue, whereas education in Los Angeles is such a community-oriented issue?
Well, education is also a national issue.
Well, yeah, but I mean the education system of LA, and if it's going to get covered on a national level anyway, why can't we just take it out of the local news and direct that more towards something that's community-oriented?
I'd like to see local news do that story, but we didn't have time, a minute and a half, or whatever we did with it tonight. Robert Downey, are you talking about? I'd like to know how other prisoners are treated.
Exactly.
I'd like to know how sheriff's deputies, from OJ to everyone else, what kind of special treatment do you get if you're a celebrity? I mean, that's obviously the story. Also, in Robert Downey's case, alcoholism and drug addiction are stories that affect almost every family everywhere. And if you're given special privileges, you're never going to get it.
But if you do that to Robert Downey Jr. and narcotics and drugs, then you're doing another 30 minutes on celebrity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, just pick
55%.
one of those stories.
But didn't we learn this morning, and we had a study that we reported, they did a content survey of, what, the last 6 years, about 6,000 stories, and tried to see whether the content and the way we covered them had changed. And I believe that correct me, I hope he's still here, was it 55% of the soft news, features, scandal, emotions, and misbehavior kinds of stories had increased? Did they make up 55% of the magazine coverage, or the whole point is that
it increased from 15% of the coverage in '77, that sort of orientation, to 43%.
43%. So it's also we're not saying don't do the interesting human interest stories, or titillation and sensation, there's a place for it. But when it's cropping up on half of the information, and then you've got how much of the other in weather and so forth, you've got to ask, what impact is that having? And this is a question in terms of resources, because you've got timelines, it's all fast moving, you've got these incredible competitions, the nature of the business has gotten such that I don't know how you can turn around anything these days, and it's such a sports fest and a mud wrestling, and you're thrown into this business.
Well, maybe I'm more concerned about your point that what I'm noticing here is that everyone remembers, I mean, you know, the celebrity story or something, and no one remembers all the news stories that we do that I think are quite good.
That's not
that may be to
justification.
Bill's point that we're not doing
Howard,
well
go
enough.
ahead.
Let me finish my question, which is that take the employment rates. You know, the big headlines now are that we're down to 4%, or is it 6%? It's a great story. You know, overall the employment rates have gone down. But when I dig below the surface, because I have to in my work, I find that the African American employment rate is at least twice that. And if you go to the African American housing projects, Jordan Downs and Imperial Courts, and if you go to the Latino housing projects, Ramona Gardens, you're talking 60 and 70% unemployment rates now.
And you don't think that's being covered?
Well,
it's being covered every day.
Okay, well, when I see that headline and I read that article, or I hear the journalist, or I hear the broadcast journalist talk about unemployment's down, it stops there, and none of it's translated. They used to actually do an employment report that talked about different sectors, rural, urban. They would do the ethnic breakdown. I don't see that anymore. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't see it.
I recall many of those stories, particularly with the young black males. A tremendous amount of attention given to the fact that unemployment is one of the major problems. Maybe with every story done about unemployment, we don't go to that. But I'm perfectly willing to beat up on television news now that I'm not so much associated with it. But
well,
I think in that case,
I don't know. Maybe I'm just missing it. But I don't see it reported as part of the context of the story was it's gone down, how great the economy's going, how much money we're making in Silicon, which is all news.
Well, Workfair is going to take care of all that, huh?
Can I just switch 1 second? I'm curious.
Okay. My question is, a number of years ago, there was a movie called Network. Remember? By
a documentary, you remember?
By Patty Chayefsky. And my question is that we seem to be, that his prediction seems to be coming true in many ways. And I know the problem you have. I know the competition. I know the ratings and everything else. I'm sitting here wondering, are we just saying that we could do nothing about it, where half of the time is spent on things that are sensational to get the ratings? Are we doomed to have that, or does anybody have from the local networks have something to tell us that will be encouraging?
I think Steve Cohen offered some words of encouragement.
You know what the answer might be? Actually, this is one of the few times where I think the answer to television might be more television. But coming on the horizon is something that's familiar in the industry, digital television. And believe it or not, by 2003, every single channel in Los Angeles, every single station that currently sends out one program, one signal, will be able to send out 4 to 6 simultaneously. You thought 500 channels, or what do we get now, 50 channels was a lot? Just wait till digital television comes in. Now that could be terrible because you get more schlock. On the other hand, it might solve a lot of problems. One of the issues we've been talking about is how do you cover Orange County, how do you cover Ventura, Inland Empire, they're different universes. If we have digital television, we could have local news that has an Orange County section, you know, on one channel or one section. You can get much more specific, much more niche. Narrow broadcasting is just in its infancy now. Wait till digital television comes along. And that's where you can get the particular kind of news you're interested in and a higher and lower, no doubt, quality of news. So that might be an answer.
Now, Howard Rosenberg has been dying to get in here. Please go ahead.
Sort of a different topic, but we're having a real good dialogue here. It's very healthy. Some people support local news, some people are against it. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers are staggering. If you look at the nu And I'm just sure that you must get occasionally critical comment from some of your viewers. And my question is, why do you not ever put this on the air?
Oh, like letters to the editor?
Yeah.
We've tried it.
Yeah,
It's not good television.
Well, I'm serious. Why? I'm getting calls from people and they say, oh, I call, they don't respond, yada, yada. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
We respond to every call.
Well, that's a good question.
On the air, why don't you create a dialogue? Why don't you let people hear your critics instead of your own promos?